Jim, so there's also there's another dimension. There's an international dimension to JFK and his administration in JFK Revisited. Tell us about that.
We tried to show all the foreign policy moves that Kennedy had made that were now going to be pretty much reversed. Okay, one of them was in Congo, all right, one of them was the Middle East, one of them was in Vietnam, and one of them that hardly anybody ever talks about was in Indonesia. Okay, we had Professor Brad Simpson and Lisa Pease talking about what happened in Indonesia as a result of Kennedy's assassination. See, the CIA had tried to overthrow Sukarno in 1958. It was probably the biggest CIA operation up until that time, only to be surpassed by the Bay of Pigs, you know. And it failed. It failed because, as Sukarno said during the whole insurrection, this is not my people rebelling. This is the government of the United States. Well, then they shot down a pilot, and the pilot, of course, was a CIA pilot. So Sukarno said, this proves it, okay? This is the CIA running this, Mr. Pope, okay? And so that did not succeed. Then Kennedy comes in, and the difference between Kennedy and Eisenhower and the Dulles brothers is that Kennedy would accept a non-aligned movement. That is, if you were a third world country trying to go it on your own and you chose to be neutral, okay, that was okay with JFK, right? But it wasn't okay with John Foster Dulles and Eisenhower. And this is what they did with Sukarno. That's why they tried to overthrow him. Because Sukarno was actually the leader of the non-aligned movement, which I believe had their first meeting in '55 in Indonesia, city of Bandung.
Yeah.
All right. And so Kennedy thinks maybe we can do something with this guy in a peaceful kind of a way. All right. And so he asked Alan Dulles for a report on what happened in Indonesia in 1968. If you can believe it, this gets back to my original point about the arrogance of these guys. He gave Kennedy a redacted version of the report. Okay. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine this? Giving the president a redacted version? Okay.
Oh,
and
gosh.
so
How patronizing.
But Kennedy could still figure that, and he goes to one of his pals in the White House. He goes, no wonder Sukarno doesn't like us. We tried to overthrow his government. Okay. And so Kennedy decided that he was going to try to do a new approach with Sukarno. And he wanted to get the CIA pilot Pope back. All right. And so he did a little deal making with this island. Was then called West Irion. Most people call it West Papua today, maybe West New Guinea. All right. And Sukarno wanted that to be part of Indonesia, but the Dutch, who had colonized Indonesia, did not want to let it go. And there's some very good reasons why they didn't, which we'll get to. But Kennedy knew that this would score some points with Sukarno. And so he arranged a meeting in New York in which Bobby Kennedy supervised the takeover of West New Guinea from the Dutch to Sukarno. All right. And that helped release the CIA pilot, Mr. Pope. And then Kennedy went ahead and started building a good relationship with Sukarno and giving him a lot of foreign aid, sending over economic advisors, okay? And because Indonesia is a very, very rich country in mineral wealth.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but of course, because they were colonized for so long, all right, they didn't have the wherewithal to go ahead and develop those on their own. All right, but there was an enormous amount of wealth: copper, gold, silver, petroleum, etc. okay, and rubber. And so Kennedy sent over advisors from Tufts University. And he even advised them. He said, look, I want an even deal on this stuff. I don't want the American companies taking 90%. Okay. I want you to start at 60-40 for Indonesia. Okay. You can go down to 50-50, but that's as low as I want to go. Okay.
Right.
Because I want the Indonesian government to have this money so that Sukarno can go ahead and do things like build schools and build roads and stuff like that. All right. And so that their instructions were, and that's what they were working on. And Sukarno fell in love with JFK. Okay, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. He really, really liked Kennedy. All right. And in fact, Kennedy had promised to visit Indonesia in 1964. And Sukarno was overjoyed at this. And he started building a little, not a little one, but a large villa for Kennedy and his wife when they came to visit the country. All right. And so when Kennedy is killed, when Kennedy's killed, Sukarno's thunderstruck. He can't believe it. And he told a reporter there, and this is just about what he said, you know, why did they kill John F. Kennedy, my friend? All right. I built this villa for him to come. Now he's never going to be here. All right.
Wow.
And he was perspiring when he said that. And there was good reason for that, because what he didn't know, but what the Dutch knew and what Alan Dulles knew, is that there was in West Papua, there were two huge fields of silver, copper, and gold. Okay. One of them was called the Erzberg, one of them was called the Grossberg. They were within 2 miles of each other. All right. The amount of metals and minerals in those two fields was not in the millions, not in the tens of millions, not in the hundreds of millions. It was in the billions of dollars. Okay. So what happened is that after JFK is killed, and by the way, Roger Hilsman in his book To Move a Nation is very clear about this. Everybody knew that when Kennedy got back from Dallas, he was going to approve the second part of this foreign aid grant to Sukarno. Well, when Johnson hesitated and then didn't sign the bill, everybody knew that everything was now going to change with Indonesia. And he said something very, very insightful. He said the problem was very simple. Kennedy was the only guy in Washington who wanted to be friends with Sukarno. He was more or less the fulcrum of that whole policy. So once he was gone, all the enemies of Sukarno now were allowed to go ahead and unify. And with Johnson not signing the bill, that was a signal for the CIA to go ahead and begin a plot against Sukarno, which they did. All right. And so what happened slowly and steadily, Sukarno lost his Western allies. The British now moved in to build this fabricated colony called Malaysia, all right, which he felt threatened by, all right. And so he cut off relations with the British. He's left the United Nations, and he said this is going to be the year of living dangerously. As you can see, that film by Mel Gibson, that was the title of that film, all right. And so the CIA begins one of the most clever plots that they ever devised. And you can read about this in Greg Polgrain's book. I think it's called JFK versus Alan Dulles, Battleground Indonesia. He has the best explanation for what happened that night. I think it was September 30th, 1965. All right, and that began the overthrow of Sukarno and the rise to power of Suharto, which is really the military, okay, General Suharto. Right. And what happened is that everything that Kennedy and Sukarno were trying to do was now completely ground into dust. And Suharto became one of the richest men in the Pacific. All right. And it went back to being an imperial state. Indonesia went back to being an imperial state. And remember what I said about the 60-40 and 50-50 deals that Kennedy wanted? The first deal Suharto signed was with this company called Freeport Sulphur. It was 90-10 in their favor.
Okay? What, in the favor of the Americans
of the company? Yeah, of the company. Yeah, Freeport Sulphur. All right. I could talk about Freeport Sulphur for another hour. That's how interesting that company is. All right. But that is what an example of what happened to Indonesia after Sukarno was overthrown. All right. And
excuse me, there must have been, actually, I want to say there must have been tremendous pressures against Kennedy from American multinationals.
Yes.
It must have been like going crazy, yeah?
Yes. Yes. The Rockefellers and the Kennedy and JFK did not get along very well. You know, that's a kind of an understatement.